Hey, Dr. Scott Boland here, and welcome to Leading in 10, the live stream where we hope to help you amplify your impact in leading yourself and others in only 10 minutes. Now, people are different. We all have different backgrounds, skill sets, hopes, and beliefs. And because of this, conflict is completely natural. Managing this conflict at work and home is therefore an essential skill for life and leadership. Here to give us some practical tips is Slaven Drnovac, CEO and founder of Coaching Center, a digital platform dedicated to empowering organizations through leadership and executive coaching. Thanks for joining us. It's said that around 69% of conflicts can never be resolved. And to me, this suggests that there isn't one approach that we should apply, but there's different approaches in different contexts. Do you agree with that, or what's your thinking around this?
Yeah. Although collaborating is the best approach, there is a space for others to be viable option to address conflict. An interesting fact that I read somewhere, I think in the US, that about 40% of leaders avoiding difficult conversations. So,
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily bad to avoid that conflict because, for example, if conflict arises and we have some urgent situation that really takes priority, so rather than staying in a conflict and trying to manage it, where we're not really have a capacity, not mental capacity to do that and potentially make it worse, avoiding conflict by putting it at some other time where we have more mental capacity to be present is probably better in resolving conflict on the long run.
There's that other case that if 69% of conflicts can't be solved, sometimes it's better just to let them be, only try and solve solvable problems. So avoidance actually can be a good strategy if it's like, okay, we're never going to agree on this. Let's stop arguing about it in that sense.
Well, I know it's a really good point. But I guess the best approach is really to assess what's happening here and which approach to take. Should we avoid it? Although sometimes avoiding sounds like a negative, but rather kind of postponing it. Should be accommodating, sort of like perhaps we don't have the time and resources, and I find that's better to let things go in particular way and devote our resources in some other areas, which is what leaders do in the decision-making approach. Competing, sometimes competing, putting our own interests, concerns first ahead of others might sound like a negative, but there is opportunity to use that in a positive context, particularly when we have to have a decision, a very quick decision making then and there. We can't avoid it because it has to be made. We can't accommodate others because it's something urgent. We can't compromise or collaborate because there's no time for it. So there is a space for this as well. And then collaborating, which does require perhaps more psychological safety, vulnerability, collaboration. So not every organization is there. And having collaborating approach in organization where the culture is not there, it's probably not going to work. So for leader, it's not so much to try to always use collaborating approach, but to choose which approach is the best based on the situation and based on the person that's involved in the conflict as well.
Yeah. So what's the difference between collaborating and compromising, for instance?
Collaborating might require perhaps a little bit more vulnerability and perhaps a little bit more time. And that's why compromising can be a good solution in a number of conflicts, because for collaborating, we do need a little bit more time, particularly when we talk about something that's a little bit more complex.
So what I'm hearing from you around this model is no one style is necessarily the best. It really depends on the context. So the take-home message is to really do a self-audit around what your style is and determine if that's the appropriate style for that particular context. Is that kind of summarizing the idea here?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Like the best, I suppose, start for any leader, for any person to kind of do that self-assessment. And so when we know ourselves better, then we're able to observe how we respond to conflict. because sometimes if we're too accommodating and the situation asks for actually competing action from a leader, it might perhaps make situation even worse.
So again, reading this set of quadrants, it kind of occurred to me that a lot of this has to do with your mental state at that time. So for example, if you're triggered, you're in fight or flight, and you're not going to have much concern for other people. Empathy is going to be low. You're going to be either running away from the conflict, fleeing, or you're going to be in fight mode. So that's the competing element. So as soon as emotions get high, you're going to be in the left-hand side of this diagram. So I guess part of this is acknowledging that you're there and saying, is this the right place I should be for this conversation? What can I do to self-soothe so I can actually free up the mental resources to explore a different area that's appropriate? So there seems to be, that self-awareness, self-regulation is actually important. But what if I want to collaborate and I'm up against someone who loves to compete the whole time? How do I actually navigate when we're actually in different quadrants than we should, particularly dealing with somebody else?
Yeah, so that will be quite, I suppose, an opposing spectrum. That person needs to be open to collaborate, because we can't do pressure on a person to collaborate if they don't want to. So finding the way for them to get into that space. And that could be potentially a conversation before this. What I find with some leaders, how they use this, they actually introduce them to this model. It could be sort of kind of education. This is the model that we're going to use to address it. How we can get to this collaborating space. What do you need from me for us to get in that space, to work in that space? And sometimes putting in a context, it might help a person to go from competing and find a way how that might look like for them.
So again, there's another aspect that intrigues me around this. In the brain, just to backtrack, empathy only exists if the person is in your in-group. So if they're in their out-group, the brain automatically goes into competition mode. It's us against them. So you're not necessarily going to collaborate. And how to work around that is to try and find similarities between yourself and the other person. And then the brain naturally switches into that collaboration mode, because that concern for the other goes up because we're viewing them as similar to ourselves. Is that one strategy for sort of saying, okay, what's similar between us? What do we both want out of this that we can both fight on the same team to get, if you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it is an approach that negotiators, that professional negotiators use on a regular basis. Quite a few corporations would have a negotiator when they negotiate big deals, and they're the one that leading conversation because they're specialists there. So the assumption is that we raise our point of view on a conflict for a reason. We are not there just because we've got nothing else to do. We want to create a conflict. There is reason behind it. So understanding that reason, what they're trying to do, and then finding the middle ground, which is kind of getting to that compromising, collaborating. What are three areas or one area that would perhaps suit for both of us, and a kind of and unpacking that area. So once you find, as you mentioned, at least one common ground, then there is that connection, as you said, pointed out, build empathy, that we can actually understand that person is not there to take away our resources, and they're actually happy to negotiate. Because when a person is in competing stage, that's usually what they're assuming, that like someone is going to take away their resources, they're going to be worse off. So how to build that connection, and as you pointed out, find a middle ground.
If there's 3 tips that you could give leaders for better navigating conflict, what would they be?
First thing is make assessment and make a judgment. Do we want to get in a conflict situation and manage it now or later? Quite often people get into conflict because of emotions, and actually make it worse. The second one is to be a little bit more observant and make assessment at what stage of conflict is a person that's across them as well. Kind of find a way, same as we do assessment ourselves, to see where at what stage is, to try to kind of mirror and kind of have that the same starting point. And third one is just I guess being comfortable with conflict. Easy to say, not easy to do, but it's a changing perception of what conflict is. Conflict has a negative connotation, but conflict is a part of life. We have a conflict with people that we love the most in our life. It's just kind of what happens.
Yeah.
So thinking is just like, rather than thinking about it as something that's necessarily bad, changing in our mindset perception of conflict, I think it can make all the difference.
Yeah. So just to summarize, conflict is completely natural, and our aim perhaps is to learn to fight right. To manage conflict in some way. Yeah. So thank you so much, Slaven. Where can people find out more about you? I've got coachingcenter.com.au. Is that the best place? Yes,
that's a good place to go. So for people who want to know more, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so it's a space, so they can find me there as well.
And you can find me at scottboland.com. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Cheers.